What happens to a woman after a long period without intimacy is not what most people expect. The common assumption is that desire fades, that emotional warmth disappears, or that she becomes restless, impatient, or emotionally needy. But science and psychology tell a very different story. In reality, the opposite often happens. When intimacy is absent for an extended time, a woman does not collapse emotionally. She adapts. Her body and nervous system begin a quiet process of recalibration designed not to suffer endlessly for what is unavailable, but to restore balance and stability. This is not weakness, it is biological intelligence. This shift is subtle, silent, and often misunderstood, especially by men who interpret emotional distance as rejection or loss of interest. What looks like coldness from the outside frequently feels like calm, control, and emotional strength on the inside. This is why so many relationships cool down without obvious conflict, why attempts to reconnect feel ineffective, and why attraction can seem distant even when respect and comfort remain. Once you understand this process, confusion gives way to clarity, and clarity changes everything. The female body is not driven by constant craving or emotional urgency. At its core, it is designed to seek balance. When intimacy is present, the nervous system integrates it naturally into emotional life. When intimacy disappears for a long period, the system does not panic, it recalibrates. The human brain is a survival-oriented organ. It does not allow prolonged suffering for something that is unavailable. Instead, it adjusts expectations, emotional priorities, and internal responses. In women, this adjustment often happens quietly and efficiently. Desire does not vanish. It reorganizes itself to fit a new reality. During this process, emotional energy is redirected towards stability, predictability, and inner equilibrium. What once flowed outward toward connection begins to circulate inward. This is not suppression, it is regulation. From the outside, this shift can look like emotional distance or detachment, but internally, it feels like calm, like balance restored, like life functioning smoothly without unnecessary turbulence. Understanding this principle is essential, because without it, many men mistake a regulated system for a closed one, and respond in ways that push connection even further away. When intimacy is part of a woman's regular emotional life, her nervous system remains highly responsive. Small signals carry meaning: a gentle touch, a sincere compliment, a moment of shared attention. These subtle cues are enough to activate emotional and sometimes physical responses. The system is sensitive because it is accustomed to stimulation. However, when those stimuli disappear for a prolonged period, the brain adjusts. This adjustment is not emotional withdrawal. It is neurological efficiency. The nervous system raises its threshold for activation, meaning that small inputs no longer register with the same intensity. Think of it like entering a dark room after standing in bright sunlight. At first, nothing is visible. Over time, the eyes adapt by becoming more sensitive. In this case, the process works in reverse. The system learns not to respond to minor signals because responding would consume energy without producing results. This is why attempts at connection, light flirting, casual affection, or polite emotional gestures may seem to have no effect, not because they are unwelcome, but because they no longer reach the activation level required to trigger an internal response. What once felt meaningful now passes unnoticed, filtered out by a system that has learned to conserve emotional energy. Desire is not only about attraction to others, it is also an internal psychological force that seeks expression. When intimacy is available, desire naturally flows outward. It looks for connection, responsiveness, and shared experience. It remains flexible and externally oriented. But when that outward expression is unavailable for a long time, desire does not disappear. Instead, it changes direction. It turns inward. In this inward state, desire becomes less visible and less urgent. It no longer organizes emotional life around connection or pursuit. Other priorities quietly take its place: routine, personal growth, emotional safety, and mental calm. This does not mean intimacy has lost its value. It simply means it is no longer central. To many women, this shift feels empowering. There is a sense of control over emotions rather than being led by them. The absence of longing feels like emotional strength, not deprivation. Internally, life feels balanced and self contained. From the outside, however, this inward turn can be confusing. What men perceive as emotional distance is often a woman living in a state where desire exists, but no longer demands expression. It is present, but silent, contained within a system that has learned to function without external stimulation. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this transformation is how it feels from the inside. When desire turns inward and emotional reactivity decreases, the experience does not register as loss. Instead, it feels like growth. Many women interpret this internal calm as emotional maturity. There is less emotional fluctuation, fewer highs and lows, and a stronger sense of control over one's inner state. Reactions become measured, needs feel manageable, life feels steady rather than emotionally demanding. This is where confusion often arises. Men may assume that something is missing, that passion has faded or interest has declined. But from her perspective, nothing feels broken. The emotional system is functioning efficiently, without unnecessary tension or longing. Because this state feels stable and self-contained, there is little motivation to disrupt it. The nervous system prefers what is predictable and regulated. Change requires energy, and the brain avoids spending energy when the current state feels balanced. Understanding this illusion is critical. What appears to be emotional distance is often a woman experiencing a sense of inner strength, mistaken for detachment by those who do not recognize the difference. When intimacy is frequent, emotional balance is often supported by external feedback, attention, desire, and responsiveness from another person. Over time, this external reinforcement becomes part of how emotional equilibrium is maintained. But in the absence of intimacy, a different mechanism develops. The emotional system learns to stabilize itself internally. As a result, the need for external validation decreases significantly. This shift can be deeply misunderstood. When a woman no longer depends on attention or admiration to feel grounded, her desire becomes quieter and more contained. It is not driven by seeking approval or reassurance. Instead, it remains self-regulated. From the outside, this can feel like an invisible barrier. Affection, compliments, and emotional availability no longer produce the expected response. Not because they are unwanted, but because the system no longer relies on them for balance. This self-sufficiency creates independence and emotional resilience. However, it also makes desire less expressive and less reactive. When nothing is required to feel complete, nothing needs to be signaled. Desire exists, but it no longer reaches outward automatically. It remains present, silent, and inwardly held. Urgency is often mistaken for interest. Many people grow up associating attraction with visible signals, anticipation, excitement, emotional intensity, and a sense of momentum. When these signals fade, it is easy to assume that attraction has disappeared as well. In reality, what often disappears is not interest, but urgency. After a long period without intimacy, a woman's nervous system may settle into a state of low reactivity. Emotional responses become calmer and less immediate. There is no internal pressure to act, pursue, or escalate. This calm can be confusing, especially for those who expect attraction to announce itself. But the brain naturally resists change when the current state feels stable. Reintroducing emotional intensity requires energy, and the nervous system avoids expending energy unless there is a clear reason to do so. As a result, attraction may exist without obvious signs. There is no rush, no tension, no visible longing. From the outside, this calm can be misread as indifference. In truth, it is simply a regulated system maintaining equilibrium, comfortable, steady, and unhurried. Humans are trained to interpret signals. When interest is expressed, we respond. When it is withdrawn, we search for meaning. Silence, in particular, tends to create anxiety because it feels like missing information. However, in this context, silence is not communication. It is not a hidden message, a test, or a rejection. It is simply the absence of need. When a woman's emotional system is regulated and self-sufficient, there is no internal pressure to signal, pursue, or clarify. Nothing feels urgent enough to express. As a result, there are no cues to interpret. This lack of signaling often leaves men searching for explanations, wondering what went wrong, what changed, or what they should fix. But there may be nothing to fix. The system is not closed, it is stable. Understanding this distinction is critical. Regulation is not emotional shutdown. Silence does not mean the door is closed. It means the system is functioning without demand. Confusing silence with rejection leads to overcorrection, pressure, and misalignment, exactly the things that make reconnection more difficult. Understanding this process changes how everything should be approached. When a woman has adapted to life without intimacy, effort alone is not what creates connection. Increasing attention, affection, or emotional availability does not automatically reawaken attraction. In many cases, it does the opposite by introducing pressure into a system that values calm. The key is not intensity, but alignment. A regulated emotional system responds to depth, not urgency. It responds to presence, not pursuit. When there is no internal hunger, attempts to feed the system feel unnecessary rather than appealing. This is why taking things personally is a mistake. The distance you perceive is not a judgment of your value. It is a reflection of how her nervous system has organized itself to function efficiently. For men, the adjustment is internal first. Let go of the need to provoke reaction. Replace expectation with grounded confidence. Create an environment where connection feels optional, not demanded. When pressure disappears, safety increases. When safety increases, openness becomes possible. Attraction does not return through force or strategy, but through resonance, when two emotional systems feel compatible rather than intrusive.